he loves me. Oh, he doesn't. Oh, I'm so special. Oh, I think I need to cut my wrists. Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. In this video, we're looking at Monster Guitar from Monster Daw. It's a little monstrous. They are free devices from a developer who is making things for free. Good on him. There are some limits, but unlike many free things that I stumble upon, this one actually offers a charm and a usability that puts it beyond its limits and also solves a problem for those willing to get in and do the work that I keep seeing people say they have. Whether that means that anybody will change their mind and actually do the work remains to be seen. Probably not. Those who do get on and do, and those who don't get on the internet and complain that they don't have what they need. But this is proof that you can do exactly what it says it's going to do. Now here is a demo piece using everything from Monster with the exception of the string sound. And he probably could have provided it too, but I got tired of downloading things. So, you probably worked out by now that it is a guitar player device. And as I said before, despite its limits, it's actually surprisingly capable. Now, it's not the only guitar player device out there in the world. There are some incredibly clever, complex devices out there. There's the Ample guitar. There's a Maton or something. There's a free acoustic thing which I have used and have done similar work with. But it's more complex than this. And this has an immediacy and a charm that means that it's able to do what it says it's going to do surprisingly quickly, so long as you understand how it works, which could be a difficulty for some, but it's a difficulty they're going to need to overcome if they want to achieve what they say they want to achieve, which is, who is this really for? It is for songwriters who are looking to prototype songs. Yes, technically you could go and release these, and nothing against that. I had somebody had a go at me recently in his little Banana Republic fiefdom because I dared suggest that a VST, in answer to a question from somebody who was clearly looking for the best, how to for free get all the sounds that he could possibly need to release his banging tunes and instantly be number one on Spotify. And I suggested, look, here's this device. It's a great device. Actually, it was Purity, Sonic Cat's Purity, which I have reviewed, and I linked him to the review too. And I got told off for how dare I suggest that you wouldn't get release quality from this. And it's like, I'm just being fair and realistic. Monster Guitar is equally fair and realistic. If we look at what they say, it's for making a MIDI mock-up for your song. Now, over and over, I see songwriters saying, well, I've written some lyrics, but then they want somebody to make the music for them. And you know what? That's super hard. I do some of that. I do some of the putting songs together for other people stuff. But it's all but impossible to do a really good job if the songwriter themselves hasn't provided the basics of their song, which is the chord, the vocal melody, and the actual vocal performance. It doesn't have to be a super performance. I mean, none of us are looking for Whitney Woo. in a demo. We're just looking to be able to hear what the song sounds and feels like. And if you can't sing your song, then we got some difficulties, especially in how to create it the way that you hear it in your head. You've got to at some stage say, okay, I'm going to put my boots on and go out there and fight. And this is a device that will actually help you go out there and start to fight. Start to fight your corner, start to build your songs. It's designed primarily for making MIDI mock-ups, which you can actually go and put out. I mean, if this had a nice vocal, a passionate vocal put to it, people would listen and they would go, yeah, cool song, job done. Yeah, there are certain people who go, but it's like, they're not your fans, ignore them. MIDI mock-up. So, Monster Daw themselves, it's one fellow out of Indonesia? Forgive me if I'm wrong, somewhere like that, somewhere that's not Australia. Makes these things, and there are quite a lot of them. I've only looked at a few of them. Obviously, we're looking specifically at, where's it gone? Guitar, there we go. You're looking specifically at guitar, but in what you heard, there was a use of bass, which is basically samples. So it's just a limited synth, and the drums came from drums, again, samples, limited drum machine. But if you've got none of this stuff already on board, like if you've decided to use Reaper or something like that, then these other things probably will do you pretty passable service in getting MIDI mock-ups of your songs. There's a whole pile of them, they're there. The site's a little messy, and some things you have to kind of follow the instructions to get there. I found that the guitar and bass showed up in Reason under Monster Daw, which is where I expected to find them. The drums didn't appear, and I'm like, oh, they're not installed and what have you. And then I discovered them under his personal name, not under Monster Daw. So some little annoying things like that, but bearing in mind the price and the functionality, particularly of guitar, I think we can come to terms with those little things. So might as well run through the good and bads, and then we will dig in and look at the product and how to get the most from it, including how to make the most of its limits. Because every time there's a limit, it provides you with another kind of opportunity. So the good is, well, it sounds pretty good. Is it as good as having Jimmy Page in your bedroom anytime you want him? Absolutely not, but nor does it ever promise that it's going to be. But in terms of predominantly having a strummer, call it Joe, in your DAW that you can access and do basic work with, yes, absolutely nails it. And pretty well slays it too. It's easy, but just like with the last thing I reviewed, well, mostly. There are some things that you have to understand, and these are not the fault of this. We'll discuss that, but if you choose not to learn even the basics of musical theory, you will struggle for decades. And I know there are people out there who go, but music theory just ruins us and tells us what to do, and it's like, no, you are ruining yourself. Just because theory says things work a certain way doesn't mean that you can't break every single one of those rules, because they're tiny rules. The rule that says that you shouldn't play consecutive seconds. Shower scene from Psycho. So if we want to play shower scene, consecutive seconds, consecutive minor seconds, are actually part of another rule. So don't get bogged down. It is easy so long as you understand how the basics of this work, and it's free. It's free. The guy gives this thing away for free. There are, as I've said, some bugs. I had some difficulty making the ADSR work. Turn the sustain down and there's still sound. That's in this particular sound. That's not actually this thing, but nonetheless, it was not working properly. Maybe he didn't realize it, but once you overamp, once you get this up to megahertz levels, then we see that there is a bug. But, you know, we can learn to live with these things. Besides, remember, primarily we're starting with a MIDI mockup. something that shows our piece, it can then be passed to somebody who's going to be able to do a better job, or actually pick up a real guitar and play these things like a human would, which is going to make a real difference, And there are some limited play options, but again, it's free and it's far simpler to come to terms with, has far less requirements on you to get a working result than other free options that have more features, but are more likely to just make your head explode because they take longer to get yourself around. So let's walk through the instrument and see how it works. It's made in Maze Sampler. Maze Sampler is one of those things where you can make stuff and then export it as a standalone VST. I honestly have really never used it. I was a synthetic man myself, but Maze is not unpopular in people doing this kind of work. And despite some kookiness, there's never a real problem with them. They seem to work far more than they don't. There's a big GUI, but generally it's pretty good. Some stuff probably is not necessary or gives you the impression that it might do something, but it doesn't. But whatever, you come to terms with it. So these GUI look like elements, but they're not. They're just little drawings between nothing and lots. Cute. Not a problem. The device comes standard with a few different styles. There are two basic play styles in here. There's chords and notes. Notes behaves as you would expect, which is what you're hearing here, not the device you're looking at. So piano style playback. But chords get a little bit different. So let's just... There we go. That doesn't work normally. We're like... So it's combinations of keys. So you will see that when I press a C, it's telling the device that I want a C-based chord. When I press that, it's giving me a 5 chord, otherwise known as a power chord. It was probably too hard to write in the box. When I press that, I get a C minor. If I press C sharp minor, D minor. So if I want a major, I have to go there. C, major. Brilliant. If I want a D, not quite so brilliant, but this is a limit of the system that he's created, and while we could say he should have done something else, it would have been really hard to do. So this is where you need to know theory. If I'm in the key of C, my C major is C, E, G. If I then want to play a D chord, that's, even though I'm in C major, it's not a D major, it's actually a D minor. So C major, D minor. So C major, D minor. This is just the bit that you need to know, and I'm not going to try and pretend to go through and give you that understanding. It's a thing you have to come to yourself. But quite simply, if you look on a keyboard, when you play a C major, it's C, E, G, all white keys. If we were to move our fingers literally up 2 semitones, then we end up with a black key in the middle. That's a D major, but that black key doesn't belong in C major as a scale. Now, there's nothing to say that we can't do that. But if we keep mixing our key scales, the listener gets mighty confused and just goes, this is permanently out of tune. In which case, that fourth gets flattened. So it moves to an F. So D, F, A is the chord that we actually want to hear that fits within the C major scale. And that is now called a D minor, even though you're in a major scale. So understand that you've just got to get a sense of how this works. So spend some time with your keyboard looking at a defined scale. Start with C major because it's the easiest one on a keyboard, because C major is the white keys and the black keys are the ones you don't play. So as soon as your fingers move and you go, ooh, hang on, then you need to adjust, which is generally to go from a major version of a chord to a minor version of a chord, but it's still just a D chord within the C major. So it goes from C major to D minor, to E minor to F major. I don't know this stuff super well, but when you're putting your piece down, you just got to know what key you're working in. And if you go, well, I don't know anything about keys, well, pick one. Anyone will do, so long as you can sing against it. If you're not sure, start with C major. You can't go mightily wrong when you're working on a keyboard with that. Guitarists might start at E, but that's just because their instrument is silly. Guitars and keyboards will play exactly the same things, but they play it differently. And that's just what we've got to come to terms with here. So the main things that we'll look at is minor, major, major, minor. That's it. We've got a normal strum, a short strum, and a long strum, which is just a roll at. You'll normally only use them on the end or at an emphasis point in the piece. So we put together our song by stringing together our chords. So if our song went C, D, F, E, C, D, F, E, then we could simply go C major, D minor, F major, E minor. Strum, 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 strum. That's our chord pattern. That's actually all we really, really need to do to prototype a song. Yes, it's going to sound a little simplistic because there's no strumming pattern, but start with the simplest that you can, which is merely decide what you want the chord progression to be. That will probably be defined by your vocal melody, but for the moment, just pick something. And you'll find that your vocal melody will probably follow whatever you've chosen. You can work backwards from a vocal melody to defining chords, but that means a greater understanding of theory than I'm assuming you have. If you have that understanding, then you're either watching this with some sense of amusement, or it's time to just work from what you have got. If when you're playing a chord pattern, you don't like the way those notes sort of seem to chop off, let's see. Notice how that chops off. Give it a sustain pedal and it will hold that as you play the next one. Technically a little bit broken with regards to how a guitar works, but you know what? No one's going to care. Inside this will be every possible sample from all these permutations. So we've got 12 notes here. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, that's 12 12s, 24 times 3. We've got a lot of samples in here. That's why it's a bit slow. The more of these we've got running in the session file, the longer it takes to load all of this stuff, and it does go into RAM. So if you're working on a very old limited computer, you may run into RAM issues, in which case probably get your bit done, render it down to audio, and then just mute the MIDI, and you can always mute the device, or even just pull it out, put it in another project so that you can pull it back if you need to make some alterations. Not ideal, but you learn to cope. But generally speaking, shouldn't be a drama. I haven't had drama. I don't have oodles of RAM in this, but I haven't had a drama. As I said, it just makes it slower to load the file. The more of these I've got running, the longer it takes because it's a lot of samples. Let's look at this in action. We'll quickly touch on these just because I got them. I thought, well, if I'm doing this, might as well have a look at it. He's got various drum sample type things. have heard and have used far worse than these. There are quite a lot of kits that you can download. I only just stayed with the original. Yes, Indonesian. There you go. I was right. And that's his shining face. Thank you. I'm not saying specifically get this. If you've got a better drum machine, go for it. But if you don't, there's worse things you could be using. It has its own issues. If you want to change a particular hit, then you have to choose it here. And then you've got a few things that you can do to change it. Not really going to dig into that at all, just showing you that it's there. The other thing of his that I used here was the bass, which, despite the fact that it's kind of drawn up like a TV303, is really just samples of various synth sounds. So go through, play with, find something that kind of fits your piece, and use it. Again, there's many other synths out there if you get into them, but if you're looking for quick, will just do the job to prototype. You can do an awful lot worse than just downloading all the monster stuff, understanding that it's going to be heavy on RAM. But it'll start you out. But the guitar is what we're looking at here. Now here is how we have played this. That's that piece. So we've got a strum pattern, which is built of telling it what note we're playing. So our chord progression is C, E, D, F. Now really, when I wrote that, I wanted some of these to go down. But because a guitar doesn't go below E, it hits E and then there's no more strings down there. Unless you've got like a 47-string guitar or something obscure, but this doesn't think like that. There is no drop D tuning here, and no real dramas with that. So if we've started on C and we want to drop to A, we actually have to go up to A. Just be aware of that when you're first programming, otherwise you'll go, but I've hit my C key, now I want to go to A. Now you have to go up to A. And that makes perfect sense if you spend any time on a guitar fretboard, because you go, oh, there isn't anything below that point. C is actually not an easy chord for most guitarists to play. While us pianists like C because it's easy and obvious, on a guitar it's not as easy or obvious. So just accept that it's a different machine you're emulating here. So there's our chord progression, and here is our strum pattern. We have used velocity. We've also used a different articulation. Not that it really shows that much here, to be perfectly honest, but they're different articulation between the longs and the shorts. But the main things that we've used to achieve our feeling of a strum pattern is velocity. So use your velocity. There is no upstroke. Normally with a guitar you have a downstroke often followed by an upstroke. You can have a strum pattern that's just all down, but commonly on an acoustic it's down and up. This doesn't emulate or give you any of the upstrokes, but an upstroke is often a little softer, in which case you can use velocity to roughly emulate that idea, and the sustain pedal. So if I mute my sustain pedal here, hear how it chops. Hear how that chops. Put this back. Nowhere near as much, but you do need to make sure that you articulate your sustain pedal. If you just put it down and leave it down, you will just create mud. You might think, oh, but it's sounding really rich and full. No, you're just creating mud. You're undoing your strum pattern. With a real struminator, you've got 6 strings at most playing, and when you start playing the next one, the one before gets muted. It just gets chopped off. So chopping off is not an unusual thing with the guitar. It's just where and when. Here you have no real control other than just let it run or chop the whole chord. It works adequately so long as you control your velocities and choose wisely and don't try to do anything particularly complex, because particularly complex is for when you send this off to either someone with a fancier VST or preferably to a real guitarist. And not somebody for $5 off Fiverr or something like that, please, because most of them are just truly terrible, and what you get back will make you feel worse about yourself probably than this. So, progression. Notice there, second round, so we've got 4 bars. At 8 bars, I've put in a variation. I've made it do something different, like it actually plays the slow thing. Also notice that the slow is playing early. This is a really important thing with guitars. When a real guitarist plays, it's not like MIDI. When a MIDI chord is played, we want it to be right perfectly on the bar here. Perfect. But when a guitarist plays, he's always starting his strum slightly before the beat. He's not thinking about it. She, it, goat, don't care, not being judgy, not being genderist at all here, in case that's... The reality is, when playing a guitar, we instinctively move ourselves forward in time slightly so that the sound of the strum appears to belong on the beat that we want it on by starting the run a little early. So when using this, in this case I haven't done much of that except for here, but where I've used this, which I already have a couple of times in tracks which are going to album, then consider moving the whole track backwards in time by a few ticks. So I've got the groove system here in Reason. I can just assign it to one of these groove patterns and then use a slide to move it before the bar by about, say, 16 ticks. And that way it's suddenly going to lock in far better and feel more natural, because otherwise the way it sits right now, it does sound a little bit midied. So don't forget that. That's a trick where you can take this and just make it sound a little bit more real. Of course, if you humanize your strum pattern as well, that can help, but just be cautious that you don't end up separating your key that needs to be played, like your C, D, E, F here, from your strum keys, because if they end up being mismatched from each other, you get a strum that belongs to the last root note, not this one. So just go a little cautiously on that. But with the long, hear how it's quite slow, so I've moved this backwards in time so that it starts playing early, so that when we hear it, it seems like it's in time. So make sure that you, if you're going to do any more than, like the moment you start getting into strum pattern, consider making some sense of variety in at least every second block. So if you've got a 4-bar block, your second one should have some sort of movement or variety. If you are just doing quite literally key and one chord, key and one chord, doesn't much matter, because all you're doing is the most basic, so nobody's looking for any more than fling, fling, fling. But as soon as you start to put in play patterns, make sure that they do move around, because no guitarist is going to play like a robot. That's the last thing you want. I know that I've met guitarists who try to play like robots, and, well, believe me, they have limited futures. So that is how it works. If we look at our bass, it's just quite literally our chord pattern. But remember, if I want to go down to my E, I have to work out how to do that, which means I can't go from here Well, I could, but it's unwise if I want to pretend this is an electric guitar or an electric bass, because it stops at E. There is nowhere below E. So if I want the C below, I have to go an octave up to get it. And it sounds perfectly normal. If we were to do this and go, oh yes, it's right, it's a drop E tuning on my bass, it's going to sound wrong. Wrong. So go high. There is nothing wrong with it. It will sound natural. So we're really literally cloning our, so if we look at this and we bring in this, they're exactly the same thing, just that some of these will go an octave up or down to suit how it would work on the neck of a guitar. It can get more complex in that in chord voicing, but we're not going to go there because that's a guitarist's problem, not ours. That's it. That's how this works. I've brought in a string line here just to give you an idea, and look, guess what? It's exactly the same. That's just playing our chord progression and the root notes. That's added some passing notes. That's it. That's all it needs to do. Now let's go look at the section with power chords. That's this next bit. And we will hit the loop button here. It's exactly the same process. The chord mode was exactly the same, even though it's a different articulation or sound. So, but power chord one just plays power chords. A fifth, which is really a close to a mute, a minor, and a major, and we've shown that that's. And you're going to hear some guitar-ish noises. We heard some fret rattle in the acoustic, and this you can hear sort of a pull-off kind of thing as he's muting the note. These are good. Don't make them go away, otherwise your performance will sound strange. Having done a lot of work in synthesizing electric guitars, a lot of the reason that guitar synthesis doesn't work very well is because it just doesn't naturally put in the strange extra noises that you get. I was just mixing a track yesterday, a kind of shoegaze, dream pop sort of thing, and there is guitar buzz is line buzz in a couple of the guitars. The bass actually has a buzz, and the question is, do I keep it or get rid of it? You know, as the line's coming in, it's played a little bit, and I decide to keep it because by getting rid of it, the piece is going to sound unnatural. It doesn't sound like it would have sounded if we were there, and it would remove some of the feeling of intimacy and garage from it. One of the guitar lines, there's like a chick or a pop that's happened just as he's about to start to play his first line. Does that mean that he's deliberately just flicked a string on his way up to hit the down? I don't know. We could say, oh, but that's noise and get rid of it. But then we're losing part of the charm of the guitar's performance. Again, we perfect it and we take away the feeling of immediacy and garaginess. That's a big part of shoegaze. So don't be frightened if you're hearing noises in here. It's probably better that they're there. Other guitar VSTs put a lot of effort into trying to drop those noises in to make it seem less like a synth. So, very simple and exactly the same process in how we have programmed this. We have got those kind of mutes which don't sound particularly mutey, and then some opens. So again, just showing our chord progression, and we move it a little bit here for some variety, and then it's a strumming pattern. Combination of opens and mutes. That's it. And really important, notice the use of velocity. So a bit quieter, louder, that helps us get the feeling, because a guitarist doesn't just play on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off. Even with a highly amplified guitar, there is still a fair amount of nuance that we can get out of that. So play, get used to it, but understand that I can do a little better than you might be doing, simply because I've been doing this for a few years in terms of guitar emulation and over 30 years in terms of being a synthesist. Notice that combination of here's a pattern and here's us providing a change or a break in the pattern, which keeps us exciting. Just like, yeah. That's how it works. It's a combination of familiar and fresh. And we keep doing that until we get to the end. And for a big finish. I hate songs that just stop. You know, people get to like, oh, I've got to the end of my 87th chord, I don't have anything else, and they can't be bothered to try and make an ending. Come on, you got to do something. If you're a singer, then you ad-lib to fade. You might just play your pattern over and over again as you go do 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 do, and we fade, and that's it. That's cool. Or you use a cadence, a major cadence being, and we talked about this in a video not so long ago, a case of using your, if we're in C major, using your D and your F, which will resolve to your C major. That's your main cadence, which is exactly what I've done here. See, we've got that coming. It's not a perfect emulation of it, but it's close enough. So we're landing on a big-ass C major to say we're done, and we feel done. And that makes people want to do it again, because it finished nicely. If you just abandon your song, let's say here, it just says I wandered out the building. Like going to a concert and they sort of get somewhere near the end of a song and then just walk off stage, and you're like, don't do it. So different versions of playing, kind of same. Now here I've also brought in a lead. Playing lead guitar on a synth is one of the most impossible things in the known universe, so don't even try to be particularly great at it. The important thing is to just hint and let people fill it in themselves. On its own sounds terrible. Here, because it is fulfilling the musical requirements of working around our chord progression and resolving, see, B to C, it's resolving, then we are very happy. We've even got the F here, F, B, C. We've got that big cadence conclusion. It is a limit. This doesn't sound particularly nice. There is another patch that you can download, another set of samples, but I didn't. Again, I just got tired of downloading samples, and that claims to be much better at leads. This is the one they say that's sort of Gary Moore, okay, but the vibrato just doesn't match what a guitarist would do. It's just completely wrong speed, everything, but your pitch wheel is set up right. So when you're watching a guitarist, you will see them doing string bends. They will play a note and woo, through. They're actually pushing that string, or sometimes pulling, but mostly pushing that string. They're bending that string. And this is how they achieve vibrato, by bending that string fast, they get vibrato. So if you're wanting a better vibrato from this, apply an LFO to the input for the mod wheel. Just understand that you don't want it to go down, because a guitar string, unless you've got a whammy bar, a guitar string can be stretched high, but it can't be stretched low, because you can't unstretch it without dropping the bridge with a whammy bar, and that will take the whole thing with you. And that there is a lot of cool to be had with that, but if you're doing a vibrato, it's got to stay in the top half of the wheel to get that kind of effect. You need to spend some time working on that, and it'll never be super realistic. Work out what sounds good inside the mock-up that you've got, and again, fire it off to a real guitarist. Any kind of session player with any kind of true skill, and you shouldn't be hiring somebody without true skill. If they say they're a session player without true skill, well, up to you. But then you should be able to achieve this. Very poor application of bend wheel, but gives us that little bit of movement. You don't need a lot. I've even done it with quite workable results using random modulations. Not what I recommend, but it loosens things up. That is it. It's a surprisingly cool device to give us the ability to prototype songs. Yes, if you want to release your prototypes, go for it. Don't let me give you the impression that I'm saying you can't. It's just the developer has been very honest that this is not going to replace Mr. Malmsteen. Doesn't attempt to. In terms of the sound, it's fairly nice, but like anything, we're going to want to process. If we take our line, it's probably easier for us to actually play this. Forgive me, sorry, I've normally got several screens, so I don't need to think this much about it. So we'll focus on our acoustic guitar. Here, how that sounds kind of full, and we can think, oh yeah, that sounds great, but we can improve this quite a bit. So we're rolling off some of the lows, because acoustic guitars tend to be tubby in the tummy, and you may have noticed that there is a high-pass filter here where you can try and achieve the same results here just by removing some of the low end. We can do better though with EQ. Finding a point in the mids where it shines, but better to remove the lows and the kludge in the mids first, because that clarifies the top end. Otherwise, if you go in saying, oh, but this is, this is like kludgy man, then you're going to find that you end up with very thin and brittle sounding guitars, which are not attractive at all. So just clear your kludge, and you will clarify the top end. These are nice and bright and clear. You may also have noticed that these guys are in stereo. That's one thing that's immediately like, oh wow, they sound amazing, because they're actually double tracked. I think they might be separate performances, I don't know, but they give the impression of being that double tracked and panned guitar, which is great, but horribly cliched. If that's a problem for you, because it will be a problem in mixing, especially if you've got a couple of guitar lines, not if you're just doing very simple stuff. It's actually a bonus and a real blessing that it's been done. Use a device to pull it to mono, and then create your panning and any effects after you've summed it to mono. You don't want to sum to mono after your effects, because if you've put on a modulating delay that creates some room space, then you don't want to kludge that or compress that back to less than the width that you want. So here we create mono and panning off. You can hear that there is reverb going over to the other side still. A word of warning: be cautious. While everyone will tell you in every group and forum everywhere, oh, when you do guitars, you've got to pan them hard left and right. No, you don't gotta. And matter of fact, it can cause some real difficulties for you by hard panning. Move them to 50 or 60 if you really do have two different takes. If you don't, leave them in the middle, because that's natural. You can leave them in the middle and not worry about any of what I'm saying right here, because you've already got a thick sound. But if the sound is too thick in terms of stereo, which is a massive problem with lots of mixers, then don't be afraid to narrow it down, either just with straight mono or that sounds more natural. That's going to mix much nicer. So again, if we did this and put it back in the mix, if you've only got one electric guitar, especially in a punky kind of setting, put it in the middle. Right down the middle. Hard in the middle. Don't go faux-ing it out to both sides, even though this does. It sort of sounds good, but if you've got one, just keep it down the middle. But if you've got a pair of guitars, then put one on one side, one on the other. Two different performances. Otherwise, it just sounds, well, naff. It sounds like, oh, this person's done it electronically, and it says a lazy, incompetent engineer. You don't want to say lazy and incompetent. There is nothing wrong with saying basic. There is nothing wrong with saying it's just the facts, ma'am. But there is a lot wrong with trying to overplay your hand. String we'll leave alone, and then there is this lead. This lead has quite a bit of processing on it. It plays just like a keyboard, as we said. But what we've got in terms of what we hear, let's make sure we've got this focused. It's a nice guitar sound. I'm assuming it's a Strat with a pretty warm recording. Nice. No dramas there at all. The high pass, okay, it's been raised. Making no appreciable difference there. Oh, they don't seem to respond to Control Z, whatever. But to get that up into a screaming guitar lead, note I am not using some kind of guitar thing. Most of those guitar things, in my mind, do more damage than good. You can get them and you can apply preset after preset after preset going, when is it ever going to sound? And it doesn't work. It kind of will never work. Spend some time, if you're going to get into electric guitars, understanding how they work. Not only the physical mechanics of the strings and the fretboard. Weird. Doesn't mean you have to learn to play it, but the more you understand the mechanics of it, the more you can emulate it. And also spend some time understanding the mechanics of how guitars get amplificated. Because if you don't, you just make yourself, again, look like somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. And that's no good. Have an unusual sound. Have a kooky sound. But don't go making a sound where you try to make yourself look clever and then come off looking stupid. Because that is not going to win you any friends. If you're busy trying to sound exactly like insert name here, you have the wrong path. You need to stand out. First time you heard Green Day, did you think, oh wow, they sound exactly like? No, I noticed and sort of thought, oh, geez, I can hear the clash in there, but you know what? They're not. First time I heard The Offspring, I thought, that's kind of a bit like The Damned, but you know what? It's not. It's close to Green Day, but you know what? It's not. Those bands stood out. They had their own unique version of what they were doing. And it's important that you do that as an indie, otherwise you'll never get noticed. So the way that I've done this, rather than getting a guitar cabinet VST and playing presets, is to understand how Drive works. We've got 2 layers. The first layer is not necessarily meant to sound particularly great on its own. I'm using a fuzz. Fuzz is high gain amplification because I just want to say we want to bring this right up. I've applied some resonance to give ourselves the beginning of a nice guitar sound, and then the rest gets done here. Overdrive on top of the fuzz. So we're amplifying some more, but it gives us this nice ripping kind of feeling, that tearing cardboard sort of sound. Play with your tones, but don't go fully bright because it's going to sound horrid. Guitars tend to be quite aggressively turned down in the treble. That's close to Killing Joke's Love Like Blood. So we've got our treble turned quite a way back and then boosted a little bit here. And then you can again set your body. This is an unusual way of doing guitar cabinets, but a surprisingly nice one. It's a resonator, which means that it's a collection of very, very short delays, which gives a sound not unlike a guitar cabinet. Just Drive, 2 layers of it. If we turn this one off, interesting guitar sound. With this particular device, the overdrive and particularly the A and B, you get a very sort of 50s, 60s kind of guitar sound, which I've used a lot, but getting that extra modern is just a case of adding more boost. And then how you handle your doom. You are better using devices that are not selling themselves as guitar amps, because the only people that understand guitar amps are the people that build guitar amps. Most guitarists I have dealt with have had little understanding of how to actually amp their instruments. I know it sounds horrifying, but they sort of twiddle these knobs randomly because they work strangely on guitar amps. You know, the bass, the treble, the mid, the this and the that. They work weirdly. So they kind of goof about and go, yeah, that seems okay. But very few guitarists actually really fully understand how to amp and get an exact sound. That's okay. This is the role of a mix engineer. So don't fuss about trying to make the perfect sound, because when I'm mixing, I would far rather get sent an MP3 that has a working sound. That's the guide mix, but then when I open the track, I get that. Yes, it's going to sound horrible, but that's not the point, because I can then amp it the way that the track needs, rather than being stuck with a sound that's like, yeah, okay, that's trying to be a screaming lead, but it just isn't. So it takes a lot of time and a lot of practice if you want to get to the point where you're going to say, oh, I want my synth guitars to sound real. Even fancy VSTs that claim they're going to give you Malmsteen in a box do not sound like that. It takes a lot of practice. So for now, again, we go back to the idea of we're just prototyping. That's enough get your basic structure. You need a verse, a chorus, and sing on top of them, and you're now able to present your song. The more you try to be clever beyond your ability to deliver the result, the more you probably will look a little silly. So stay with your basics. If you're sending it off to somebody who's going to complete the song, whoever that is, preferably not somebody that you're spending $15 on, building a song should be at least $300 to $500 because there's a lot of time and energy that goes into it. If you're expecting a nice completed song back, then you want to be spending really not much less than $500 at base, because the person's going to be playing quite a few instruments, building those lines and playing them, building the movement into the track, and somebody's going to be mixing it as well. Depends, and also if you're asking them to sing it, then there's even more experience and expertise and what have you in doing that. But this will get you to the point where you can actually show your song in songwriter groups, rather than taking a photograph of your lyrics and posting that and saying, here's my song. It doesn't cut it. No one will work with you like that. At least no one's serious. Whereas if you present it like this, oh, he loves me. Oh, he doesn't. Oh, I'm so special. Oh, I think I need to cut my wrists. That gives us a far better idea of what we've got going on there. I should be a songwriter. I made that stuff up as I was going. So, rounding out, we have a device that is incredibly well suited to what it says it's going to do. You can push it and get a little clever the more skills you have with regards to composition and mixing, but just understand the basics that you choose the root key and then the way the chord expresses. C major, C sharp major, C sharp minor, D minor. You've also got these sustains, minor sixes, sustain fours, diminished, dominant seventh, augmented, major sixes, minor seventh, major sevenths. Now, until you understand them, ignore them. They do have purpose, and they are used quite elegantly by a remotely decent guitarist, but for the moment, just major, minor. If you are starting in the key of C, here's my key is C major. That's your scale. Therefore, C will be a major, D will be a minor. And that way you're all in key. You can play around with some of the others. I did ever so slightly. But until you understand what they are and how those chords are made up, because it's kind of kooky, then it's best not to mess with them, because otherwise suddenly you'll introduce this element that sounds out of tune. But if you're playing with your major and your minor and they don't seem natural, then work your way through one of the other variants, like a sus or an augment, just to see if that bridges your gap nicely, because that's what they tend to do, bridge gaps. Do some reading on them. It's not really for me to answer that. I'm not skilled enough to answer that. And unfortunately, most guitarists have kind of just learned to do it by feel and are not necessarily very good at the teaching part of it. So go online and read up on what's a sus2 chord and work out how it looks on your keyboard. So it's going to be a sus2 is, if I'm correct, it's a C, D, and G. Not the C, E, G, so it's C, D, G. Sounds terrible, but it works beautifully when you get in the right place. And the 4 is C, F, G. Again, but it works brilliantly in the right place. Not with all sounds, but guitars use these things a lot. Remember, different strumming, move that time forward slightly, just a little ahead of the beat for your normal short variations, and then probably a fair way, a whole 16th or more ahead, just to get you long so that it feels like it belongs on the beat. Otherwise it'll be lagging behind and sound naff. And they're the little things that you can do with very simple work to deliver we won't say fully natural, but a workable guitar line to go along with you. Very basic drum patterns is boom, cha, boom cha, boom boom cha, boom cha, boom boom cha is enough to underpin what you're doing, and boom, you can actually pop that up. And that's far better than lists of words that don't have anything attached to them. Because if you're a songwriter, you have to write the core of the song, which is not just words, but words with chords and a vocal melody, which is what you're singing. And from there, if you are going to work with somebody, then they've got what they need to develop your song, not just turn your words into their song. If you have questions, ask them down below, preferably after hitting subscribe. I can't give you all the info on how to become an amazing guitarist based on using this, but there are the basics as we've shown you, and you can get there if you apply yourself and don't expect results in 2 minutes. Benedict for higher hertz. There is also higherhertz.com. Pop on over there. There's a different channel of information. Again, we'd love to see you subscribe because it lets YouTube know that we are doing something of value. You have a great day now.